It has been 75 days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home. Today, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is processing a single physical anomaly. They recovered a material glove located exactly 2 miles from her primary residence. This specific development shifts the entire forensic landscape of this ongoing investigation. The physical item was located on a desolate stretch of road leading toward the interstate. Crime scene. Technicians utilized specialized electrostatic dust print lifters in the immediate surrounding area. They documented the precise global positioning coordinates before moving the item into a sterile container. The material evidence is currently undergoing advanced genetic genealogy testing at a central laboratory. Forensic analysts are working meticulously to extract any cellular material trapped within the fabric fibers. The application of forensic genetic genealogy represents a massive shift in modern criminal investigations. Analysts compare the unknown genetic sequence against public databases to identify distant familial relatives. This methodology successfully identified offenders in numerous complex cases over the past decade. The central question for forensic profilers and behavioral analysts is now sharply defined. Did the perpetrator discard this item in a moment of sheer panic? Or was this a calculated decoy meant to manipulate the sequence of genetic analysis? Profilers must determine the exact psychological state of this unknown subject. Authorities need to know if they are hunting a disorganized criminal or a sophisticated offender. A disorganized offender makes critical mistakes under the intense pressure of an active abduction. A sophisticated offender intentionally plants biological red herrings to waste limited federal resources. The central laboratory is utilizing specialized equipment to sequence the microscopic genetic markers. They are attempting to isolate the sequence from environmental contamination caused by weather exposure. The arid climate of the Arizona environment rapidly accelerates the deterioration of cellular moisture. Every hour that passes degrades the viability of the organic material left on the surface. Investigators have secured the perimeter where the item was discovered to prevent further contamination. The chain of custody is strictly maintained to ensure the evidence remains legally admissible. We are currently waiting on the final genome sequencing results from that central laboratory. I am actively monitoring the federal databases for any new forensic developments regarding this evidence. You must subscribe to Tracking Evil with John to receive the next analytical breakdown. We will broadcast the update the moment this genetic data is officially declassified. The community needs to understand the intricate science behind this modern forensic hunt. We will analyze the data structure as soon as the authorities release the final report. The implications of this single item stretch far beyond a simple, careless physical mistake. To understand the gravity of this physical evidence, we must establish the precise chronological timeline. We must analyze the sequence of events before the security grid went completely blind. The data begins at 9:50 at night on the 31st of January. Tommaso Cioni drove his 84-year-old mother-in-law back to her property. The Associated Press confirmed that he is the last known person to see her alive. He safely escorted her inside and ensured the residential perimeter was properly secured. He closed the garage door and departed from the residential premises shortly after. The external environment remained entirely undisturbed for exactly 237 consecutive minutes. The neighborhood was quiet, and the exterior motion sensors recorded zero anomalous activity. The operational status of the property changed drastically at 1:47 in the morning. On the 1st of February, a masked individual approached the front entrance of the structure. The surveillance footage captured a figure deliberately avoiding the primary illumination zones of the porch. The calculated precision of the camera deactivation suggests a prior reconnaissance of the property. The perpetrator knew the exact location of the hardware and its specific visual blind spots. This person manually dismantled the digital security camera system covering the primary access point. The visual surveillance feed went completely dark immediately after this deliberate physical interference. The total duration of the recorded intrusion lasted less than 12 consecutive seconds. At 11 in the morning, family members realized she was absent from the property. They conducted a preliminary sweep of the interior rooms and found nothing unusual. They immediately contacted the Pima County Sheriff Department to initiate a formal search protocol. Uniformed deputies arrived and began documenting the physical state of the primary residence. Medical records confirm she requires daily cardiovascular medication to maintain her basic physiological stability. All of these essential pharmaceutical supplies remain completely untouched upon the bathroom vanity counter. The architectural layout of the residence features multiple potential points of covert entry. However, the perimeter sensors on the secondary windows registered 0 unauthorized access attempts. A phantom entered the residence that night with unprecedented stealth and complete environmental control. The interior of the house yielded 0 signs of a physical struggle or forced entry. Law enforcement agencies immediately initiated a grid search pattern radiating outward from the house. However, the substance left on the outside of the door is the true forensic anomaly. We must transition our focus from the missing woman to the trace evidence she left behind. The architectural integrity of the primary residence presents the first major analytical anomaly. Investigators documented the exact state of every window and external access point. Forensic technicians applied luminescent chemical agents to detect latent prints near the door. The interior environment retained a state of absolute clinical preservation. An abduction typically generates significant chaotic displacement of furniture and personal items. The spatial analysis of the living room indicates 0 kinetic disturbance occurred. The absence of defensive marks suggests the victim was incapacitated immediately or left willingly. Behavioral analysts must evaluate the probability of an 84-year-old opening the door. The temporal data points to 1:47 in the morning during winter conditions. A resident of that demographic profile rarely unseals a locked perimeter at that hour. This variable introduces the hypothesis of a familiar visitor or a highly deceptive entry method. The perpetrator potentially utilized social engineering tactics to bypass the physical security barriers. The medical profile of the victim complicates the compliance theory significantly. The cardiovascular medication remaining on the bathroom counter is a critical data point. A willing departure would logically include the acquisition of life-sustaining pharmaceutical compounds. The human survival instinct prioritizes the transport of necessary medical supplies above all else. The suspect either restricted her access to the medication or removed her by sudden force. However, a forced manual extraction of a non-compliant subject generates inevitable physical evidence. Scuff marks on the flooring or displaced decorative objects would indicate physical resistance. The crime scene technicians vacuumed the entrance hallway, seeking foreign microscopic fibers. The preliminary laboratory results indicated a complete absence of anomalous textile transfer inside. The perpetrator managed to extract the target while maintaining 0 internal environmental impact. This level of operational cleanliness requires extensive planning and precise execution. The timeline narrows the window of extraction to a matter of mere minutes. The physical manipulation of a human body requires specific biomechanical leverage. Transporting an adult through a standard doorway without contacting the doorframe is extremely difficult. Yet the forensic dusting procedure yielded 0 smudges on the interior wooden frames. The suspect operated with a chilling degree of spatial awareness and physical control. The analysis of the domestic security hardware reveals another layer of complexity. The deadbolt mechanism showed 0 microscopic scratching indicative of mechanical lockpicking tools. The tumblers inside the locking cylinder remain perfectly aligned and undamaged. This specific mechanical data strongly implies the door was open from the inside. We must consider the psychological manipulation required to achieve this specific outcome. The suspect might have utilized a distress ruse to compel the victim to open the door. The auditory environment of the quiet neighborhood would amplify any external vocalizations. A simulated emergency could bypass the logical risk assessment protocols of an elderly resident. The alternative hypothesis involves a previously acquired physical key to the property. A duplicated key allows rapid infiltration without generating acoustic warnings or structural damage. The investigators are actively auditing the access logs of local hardware and key duplication services. They are compiling a matrix of every individual with temporary access to the residence. This comprehensive list includes maintenance, personnel, and medical care providers and extended acquaintances. The intersection of the medical evidence and the structural data creates a profound paradox. The sterile interior points toward a sophisticated and highly organized intrusion methodology. The missing medication strongly indicates a sudden and completely unexpected disruption of daily routine. These two data points exist in direct analytical opposition to each other. The paradox deepens significantly when we analyze the exterior physical evidence. The perfection of the interior extraction abruptly terminates at the external threshold. The Pima County Sheriff Department secured the concrete porch immediately upon arrival. Crime scene investigators identified a concentrated pooling of biological fluid near the entrance. The central laboratory expedited the genetic sequencing of this specific biological material. The analytical results conclusively matched the genetic profile of the missing 84-year-old resident. This data point fundamentally alters the behavioral profile of the unknown subject. The perpetrator executed a flawless covert entry but initiated a violent physical trauma outside. The spatial relationship between the deactivated camera and the biological fluid is critical. The surveillance hardware was systematically disabled at 1:47 in the morning. The suspect demonstrated a clear understanding of digital security networks and optical fields of view. This action requires cognitive clarity and specific technical knowledge regarding low-voltage wiring. The dismantling of the recording device was a preemptive measure to ensure absolute anonymity. Yet the same individual left a highly visible biological indicator directly on the concrete surface. This contradiction represents the most significant behavioral fracture in the entire investigation. The profilers must reconcile the technical sophistication with the gross physical negligence. You must analyze this specific behavioral dichotomy and share your analytical perspective in the comments. A sophisticated offender who understands digital surveillance should also understand biological trace evidence. The presence of the victim's fluid indicates a sudden loss of operational control. A dynamic physical struggle likely occurred immediately after the victim crossed the exterior threshold. The blunt force or sharp force trauma required to generate that fluid volume is significant. The acoustic signature of such an event should have alerted adjacent residential properties. However, the canvas of the neighborhood yielded zero auditory witnesses to any violent altercation. The perpetrator managed to inflict a bleeding wound while maintaining absolute auditory silence. This requires either specialized equipment or an immediate and overwhelming physical suppression technique. The position of the biological evidence relative to the deactivated camera creates a severe logical deficit. If the suspect neutralized the camera, why did the violent interaction happen on the porch? The logical protocol for an abduction is to secure the target inside an extraction vehicle. Initiating a violent sequence in an exposed exterior environment maximizes the risk of visual detection. The ambient illumination from the municipal streetlights partially covers that specific concrete area. The suspect operated in a zone of elevated exposure while simultaneously attempting to hide. This behavioral inconsistency is the exact type of anomaly we analyze on this platform. You must ensure you are subscribed to Tracking Evil with John for these continuous deep dives. We dissect the psychological contradictions that define these complex, ongoing investigations. The biological material on the porch forces investigators to reconsider the fundamental motive of the crime. Was the primary objective a clean abduction or a targeted physical assault? A clean abduction prioritizes the safe and quiet transport of the primary target. A physical assault introduces chaotic variables and exponentially increases the forensic footprint. The perpetrator achieved a hybrid scenario that defies standard criminological categorization. They successfully removed the victim from the premises without generating internal evidence, but they failed to contain the biological consequences of the extraction on the exterior. This failure provides the forensic teams with their most valuable vector of investigation. The volume and the splatter pattern of the fluid can indicate the specific mechanism of injury. Bloodstain pattern analysis can reveal the angle of impact and the physical position of the victim. The technicians are calculating the velocity of the droplets to reconstruct the physical dynamic. This mathematical reconstruction will expose the exact sequence of movements on that porch. The calculated deactivation of the digital eye directly contrasts with the violent biological release. We must ask why a phantom who moves through walls suddenly leaves biological evidence on the doorstep. The primary physical evidence shifted the investigation radius precisely 2 miles down an isolated transportation corridor. A single discarded textile artifact became the absolute focal point of the federal forensic analysis. Investigators cataloged a synthetic work glove lying near the shoulder of the desolate paved surface. The Federal Bureau of Investigation meticulously analyzed the structural composition of this recovered textile item. Analysts compared the physical dimensions and material reflectivity against the final frames of the digital footage. The visual data captured mere milliseconds before the camera system shut down provided a definitive match. The synthetic weave pattern and specific structural dimensions aligned perfectly with the hardware manipulation event. The recovery protocols for this crucial item required strict adherence to environmental contamination prevention standards. Field technicians established an immediate sterile perimeter to isolate the object from subsequent biological interference. They utilized specialized atmospheric filtration units to mitigate the introduction of external organic matter. The physical transfer of the object utilized vacuum-sealed containment vessels to preserve microscopic data. This specific location introduces severe complications regarding the geographic profiling of the unknown subject. The distance of 2 miles suggests a vehicular transport vector originating from the primary crime scene. A perpetrator traveling on foot rarely discards incriminating physical materials at that specific calculated distance. The geographic coordinate indicates a transition phase between the extraction zone and the final destination. The drop location might signify the exact moment the suspect removed their physical disguise materials. Behavioral analysts must determine if this disposal was an accidental loss or a deliberate procedural action. An accidental loss indicates a degraded psychological state and an elevated level of physiological stress. A deliberate disposal transforms the isolated road into a secondary staging area for physical evidence. The central laboratory immediately initiated destructive testing protocols on specific segments of the synthetic fabric. Forensic biologists targeted the interior lining of the garment to isolate potential epithelial cellular shedding. The friction generated by human movement naturally deposits microscopic dermal layers into tight synthetic environments. The extraction methodology requires submerging the targeted fabric sections in specialized chemical solvent solutions. Centrifugal separation techniques then isolate the heavier cellular components from the artificial textile particulate matter. The technicians are hunting for a complete microscopic sequence to construct an identifying genetic profile. The Arizona climate presents a formidable obstacle to the preservation of fragile biological marker structures. Ambient thermal radiation accelerates the degradation of organic compounds trapped within the exposed synthetic fibers. Moisture evaporation actively destroys the delicate molecular bonds required for comprehensive genomic sequencing procedures. The laboratory personnel must reconstruct a complete genetic map from severely compromised and degraded source material. Every layer of forensic testing pushes the analytical boundaries of current biological identification technology. The presence of multiple genetic signatures would indicate a previously contaminated garment or multiple suspects. A single isolated genetic profile provides a direct investigative vector toward a specific biological individual. The pressure on the biological analysis division increases exponentially with every passing hour of this investigation. The physical item sitting in the sterile chamber represents the only tangible link to the perpetrator. The investigative teams rely completely on the microscopic data trapped inside that synthetic weave. The structural integrity of the glove provides additional clues regarding the occupation of the subject. Abrasions on the palmar surface can indicate familiarity with specific industrial or mechanical equipment. Chemical residue analysis might reveal exposure to specific agricultural or manufacturing compounds before the incident. The mass spectrometer readings will categorize any microscopic chemical particulate trapped within the outer fibers. This elemental data could effectively narrow the suspect pool to individuals operating in specific industrial sectors. The forensic timeline dictates that the laboratory requires several consecutive days to finalize the sequencing. The initial biological survey merely confirms the presence of human organic material on the fabric. The subsequent amplification process requires meticulous thermal cycling to duplicate the degraded genetic strands. We are observing a microscopic race against the natural deterioration of essential cellular evidence. The transition from physical observation to biological decoding marks a critical phase of the inquiry. The investigators must wait for the machinery to translate organic matter into a mathematical sequence. This microscopic battleground replaces the concrete porch as the primary theater of this ongoing investigation. The delay in definitive laboratory results creates a significant temporal vacuum for the investigative teams. Field Agents must pursue alternative evidentiary vectors while the biological processing completes its necessary cycles. The focus expands beyond the physical realm into the invisible atmospheric network surrounding the extraction zone. The intersection of organic material and digital signals defines the modern forensic landscape we are analyzing. The physical evidence on the roadway directly correlates with the digital absence at the primary residence. The suspect successfully deleted their visual footprint but left a massive biological anchor behind. This specific analytical contradiction remains the most baffling aspect of the entire operational sequence. A. Criminals sophisticated enough to blind a surveillance network should meticulously control their physical garments. The juxtaposition of technical precision and physical carelessness requires a deep reevaluation of the behavioral profile. The profilers consider the possibility of a dual suspect scenario to explain this operational variance. One individual possesses the technical acumen, while the secondary individual physically executes the primary extraction. This hypothesis effectively compartmentalizes the varied skill sets demonstrated throughout the chronological sequence of events. However, a multiple perpetrator theory exponentially increases the probability of post-incident communications and eventual detection. The communication logs across regional cellular towers during that specific time frame are currently under review. Analysts are searching for anomalous data bursts originating near the residence and terminating near the glove. The synchronization of physical location data and digital transmission records is vital for a comprehensive reconstruction. The single glove remains the absolute centerpiece of the physical evidence matrix collected thus far. The entire trajectory of the federal manhunt hinges on the structural integrity of those cellular bonds. The transition from physical tracking to digital hunting introduces the next massive complication in this case. The analytical complications multiply significantly when we integrate the secondary tier of digital forensic data. The Public Broadcasting Service reported a critical discovery regarding invisible network signals near the primary residence. Independent cybersecurity specialists identified a specific unprotected wireless fidelity network operating near the crime scene. This unencrypted digital access point belonged to an active commercial construction site located immediately adjacent. The automated digital logs of this commercial router captured a series of anomalous peripheral connections. A localized device actively scanned for available wireless frequencies during the exact time frame of the abduction. The timestamp of the digital handshake corresponds perfectly with the physical deactivation of the visual surveillance. The forensic cybersecurity teams are attempting to isolate the unique media access control address involved. Every digital device possesses a permanent structural identifier assigned during the initial manufacturing process. Tracking this specific hexadecimal identifier could potentially reveal the exact hardware utilized by the unknown subject. The perpetrator potentially carried an active smart device while executing the complex digital security bypass. This action represents another catastrophic operational failure mirroring the disposal of the physical synthetic garment. The transmission of a wireless probe request effectively broadcasts the physical location of the emitting device. The investigative units must now reconcile the presence of the physical glove and the digital ping. The geographic data from the router indicates the device was within 100 yards of the door. The physical evidence was recovered exactly 2 miles away along a designated vehicular escape route. The integration of these two distinct datasets allows analysts to calculate a preliminary departure velocity. The suspect departed the residential perimeter and accelerated toward the isolated roadway within a specific window. The tension surrounding the investigation amplifies when we examine the complete absence of perpetrator communication. The family of the missing woman established a highly publicized financial reward of $1 million. This substantial monetary compensation was broadcast across every regional and national media syndication network. A financially motivated abduction typically generates immediate back-channel communications to establish ransom delivery protocols. The absolute silence from the responsible party directly contradicts the standard economic model of targeted abductions. The lack of a financial demand forces investigators to analyze significantly darker underlying behavioral motivations. The operation required extensive surveillance and technical preparation but yielded zero subsequent financial extortion attempts. This specific behavioral metric suggests the primary objective was the physical acquisition of the target itself. The financial reward remains entirely unclaimed, while the investigative days continue to accumulate without resolution. You must follow this specific analytical thread by subscribing to Tracking Evil with John right now. We will continuously monitor the intersection of these digital footprints and the ongoing biological laboratory results. The silence from the perpetrator acts as a psychological vacuum designed to terrorize the surviving relatives. Law enforcement must operate within this informational void without the benefit of direct adversarial communication. The digital footprints at the construction site provide the only alternative method of tracking the suspect. The investigators obtained the comprehensive digital routing logs through a specialized emergency judicial subpoena process. The data requires extensive algorithmic filtering to separate neighborhood ambient traffic from the anomalous targeted signals. The cybersecurity technicians cross-reference the suspect network pings against known cellular service provider databases. The goal is to match the localized wireless handshake with a broader regional cellular tower registration. If suspect device connected to both networks simultaneously, the physical location can be mathematically triangulated. The complexity of this digital reconstruction requires massive computational resources and specialized federal technical assistance. The conflicting layers of evidence present a labyrinth of contradictory behavioral indicators for the profiling team. The invisible digital signals clash directly with the tangible biological fluid left on the concrete porch. The silent response to the million-dollar reward clashes with the high-risk nature of the operation. The meticulous interior preservation clashes with the careless disposal of the synthetic glove on the roadway. Every new data point simultaneously illuminates a path and deepens the overall complexity of the matrix. The tension among the federal agencies is palpable as they navigate these conflicting evidentiary streams. The pressure to synthesize the digital logs and the biological sequencing results is absolutely immense. The investigators are holding in fragments of data while waiting for a unified structural revelation. The digital router logs from the construction site remain under strict federal classification at this time. The analytical community anticipates a significant breakthrough once the media access control address is finally decrypted. The intersection of the digital footprint and the genetic analysis represents the absolute apex of modern forensics. The next phase of the investigation relies entirely on the convergence of these two distinct scientific disciplines. The biological material on the glove will eventually reveal the genetic ancestry of the unknown subject. The digital logs from the construction site will eventually reveal the electronic hardware they carried. The investigators are actively building a comprehensive trap utilizing both microscopic biology and invisible radio frequencies. The suspect successfully navigated the physical environment but left permanent scars across the digital and biological spectrums. The upcoming revelation regarding the genetic database matching will fundamentally alter the trajectory of this search. We are approaching a critical threshold where the accumulated data points will finally force a definitive conclusion. The silent perpetrator is currently surrounded by an expanding invisible net of specialized forensic analysis. The following developments will dictate whether the digital and biological data can identify the phantom. The Federal Forensic Laboratories reached a critical technological milestone regarding the synthetic glove analysis. The biological extraction yielded a sufficient quantity of high-quality genomic material for sequencing. Forensic genetic genealogy serves as the primary scientific mechanism for identifying the unknown suspect. This specific process involves comparing millions of distinct genetic markers across diverse public databases. The analysts identified a significant clustering of genetic matches within a specific regional lineage. This genealogical discovery effectively bridges the gap between the physical evidence and a name. The unknown subject belongs to a specific family tree with roots in the Southwest. This technological breakthrough represents the definitive apex of the current criminal investigative efforts. The genetic data points toward an individual with specific ancestral ties to Arizona. The authorities are currently filtering through thousands of potential genealogical records to narrow the focus. This massive forensic mistake provides the investigators with an immutable biological link to the suspect. The integration of this genetic data fundamentally shifts the trajectory of the entire search. You must share this specific development with your community to aid in the search. The power of public genealogy databases is the most formidable weapon in modern law enforcement. The suspect left their entire biological history on that discarded synthetic work glove. The laboratory technicians are now performing specialized kinship analysis to identify the immediate relatives. This scientific precision creates an inescapable net around the individual responsible for the extraction. The transition from an anonymous phantom to a specific genetic profile is now complete. The investigators are holding a definitive biological map that leads directly to the perpetrator. The tension within the federal task force is centered on this specific genetic revelation. The suspect managed to evade visual surveillance but failed to evade their own biology. This single careless act on the roadway has effectively terminated their period of anonymity. The genealogical data provides a level of certainty that standard physical evidence cannot achieve. We are observing the systematic dismantling of the suspect's carefully constructed operational security. The genetic sequence is the final and most powerful witness in this complex case. The authorities are preparing to execute targeted search warrants based on these genealogical findings. The investigation has transitioned from a wide search to a specific human target. The revelation of this genetic lineage marks the most significant peak in the case. The suspect's mistake in discarding the glove will likely lead to their eventual identification. The investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie remains in a state of intensity. The authorities are currently conducting a comprehensive audit of the identified genealogical family tree. Federal agents are interviewing potential relatives to isolate the specific identity of the suspect. The current status of the case is a tactical waiting period for identification. The primary objective remains the safe recovery and location of the 84-year-old. The laboratory results provide a path forward, but the victim's location remains unknown. The federal task force continues to analyze the digital logs from the construction site. Two critical questions continue to dominate the strategic planning of the investigative units. First, we must determine if the suspect is currently holding the victim nearby. Second, we must ask if there are additional accomplices assisting with the concealment. The absence of a physical resolution generates a state of prolonged psychological uncertainty. The evidence suggests a highly technical perpetrator who remains at large in the community. The community must maintain a high level of vigilance regarding any suspicious local activity. The investigators are working through the weekend to finalize the identification of the subject. The genetic net is closing, but the physical search for Nancy continues unabated. The emotional weight of this ongoing case continues to affect the surviving family members. The $1 million reward remains a standing offer for any information leading to her. The federal agents are committed to pursuing every lead generated by the genetic data. The state of the investigation is currently focused on the final identification phase. The biological evidence from the roadway is the key to resolving this mystery. We are waiting for the final confirmation from the federal genealogical experts today. The physical manipulation of the residential security hardware exposes a critical vulnerability in modern systems. What this case teaches us about domestic digital surveillance is fundamentally alarming for homeowners. Most residential consumers rely entirely on wireless fidelity networks to transmit external optical data. These commercial systems prioritize ease of installation over robust physical and digital security protocols. A sophisticated intruder can easily exploit the external mounting hardware of a standard camera. The perpetrator in this investigation simply disconnected the primary power source from the device. Homeowners must physically secure all external power conduits within reinforced metallic casing structures. You must ensure your optical surveillance equipment possesses an internal battery backup mechanism. This secondary power source guarantees continuous data recording during a deliberate electrical grid disruption. Furthermore, the digital transmission signals require advanced encryption protocols to prevent external network interference. The router logs from the adjacent construction site demonstrated the fragility of unencrypted digital environments. Property owners should configure their wireless routers to reject unrecognized media access control addresses. This specific configuration prevents unauthorized individuals from monitoring the digital traffic of your residence. Another critical factor involves the physical placement of the optical sensors around the entire property. Surveillance devices installed at standard elevation levels remain highly susceptible to direct manual tampering. Security professionals recommend elevating all optical hardware beyond the reach of an average human. This architectural adjustment significantly increases the difficulty of a rapid and covert camera deactivation. Evaluating the structural integrity of your home network is a necessary modern survival tactic. The digital blind spots of a residence are just as dangerous as unlocked doors. A comprehensive security grid must integrate both physical hardening and advanced digital encryption standards. The failure of the perimeter defense in this case allowed a phantom to enter. We must utilize these forensic insights to fortify our own residential perimeters against intrusion. The intersection of physical vulnerabilities and digital exploitation creates the perfect environment for abductions. Understanding the methodology of this specific offender allows the public to implement necessary countermeasures. The security protocols of tomorrow must anticipate the technical sophistication demonstrated during this crime. We will transition our focus back to the immediate future of this active investigation. The fundamental paradox of the synthetic glove continues to define this complex ongoing investigation. We must return to the absolute center of the forensic analysis currently underway today. Did the unknown subject leave the biological material on the roadway by pure accident? Or did this highly technical intruder construct an elaborate genetic decoy to misdirect authorities? The answer to this specific behavioral question will determine the ultimate outcome of the search. The federal laboratory is currently finalizing the sequence that will identify this silent perpetrator. The digital records from the construction site remain pending final decryption by cybersecurity teams. Every passing hour increases the probability of a definitive match within the public databases. The disappearance of Nancy Guthrie remains an open and highly active federal criminal inquiry. The authorities require the vigilance of the public to monitor the surrounding regional environment. The lack of financial demands maintains the severe threat level associated with this suspect. We will cover every development as the genetic sequencing results are officially released publicly. You must subscribe to Tracking Evil with John to receive the immediate forensic updates. This channel will broadcast the exact moment the identity of the suspect is confirmed. The physical evidence is currently speaking through the microscopic language of genetic biological markers. We are waiting for the final translation to echo across the entire investigative community. The 84-year-old victim is still missing somewhere in the surrounding geography. The clock governing the biological degradation of the evidence is still ticking right now. When the genetic profile is finally revealed, we will be right here dissecting it alongside you.